In the winter of 1959, in the heart of the Ural Mountains, 9 experienced hikers set out on an expedition that should have been a triumph. Instead, it became one of history's most chilling and unsolvable mysteries. They were found weeks later, miles from their tent, which was bizarrely ripped open from the inside. They had fled into the brutal, sub-zero wilderness, some without shoes, some without proper clothing. Their bodies revealed a story of terror and inexplicable violence. What happened on that mountain, a place the local Mansi people call Kolat-Sayakol, or the Mountain of the Dead. For over 60 years, the answer has been buried under a blanket of snow, secrecy, and fear. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Our story begins with a group of bright, athletic students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnical Institute. They were more than just a team. They were close friends, bound by a shared love for adventure. Leading them was 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a brilliant radio engineering student and a seasoned hiker. He was the architect of this ambitious trek, a Category 3 expedition, the highest difficulty rating in the Soviet Union. With him was Zinakov, often described as the vibrant heart of the group, full of life and optimism. There was also Rustem Slobodin, a strong and capable engineer, and Yuri Udin, the 10th member, who luckily turned back early due to illness, unknowingly saving his own life. The others: Ludmila Dubanina, Alexander Kalivitov, Judy Kriboniskenko, Georgy Kribonischenko, Semyon Solotaryov, and Nikolai Thibobrino-Lassoir. All skilled and prepared for the harsh conditions, their own diary entries and photographs from the start of the journey paint a picture of joy and camaraderie. They were laughing, building snowmen, full of the excitement that comes with conquering the wilderness. They were at the peak of their youth, capable and unafraid. On February 1st, they began their ascent of Kolat-Sayakol. Late in the afternoon, they pitched their tent for the night. This is where the mystery truly begins. Their chosen location was strange for such experienced hikers. Instead of setting up camp in the tree line below, which would have offered protection from the elements, they camped on the exposed, open slope of the mountain. Why? It was a decision that defied all logic. From here, their story goes silent, documented only by the macabre scene found by searchers weeks later. When the group failed to send a telegram by their scheduled return date of February 12th, families began to worry. At first, delays were common on such expeditions, but as days turned into weeks, a full-scale search and rescue operation was launched. On February 26th, the search party made the first discovery. The group's tent, half buried in snow. The sight was deeply unsettling. The tent was badly damaged, but it hadn't collapsed. It had been sliced open with a knife. But crucially, from the inside, it was as if something inside had compelled the hikers to slash their way out and flee into the deadly cold. Their boots, warm clothing, and supplies were all left behind. 9 sets of footprints led away from the camp, down the slope towards a patch of woods over a mile away. The footprints showed that some were wearing only socks, others were completely barefoot. What could have terrified them so much that they would abandon their only shelter and run barefoot into a Siberian winter night, where temperatures plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius? The first 2 bodies were found at the edge of the forest, beneath a large cedar tree. They were Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. They were dressed only in their underwear. A small fire had been started, and the branches on the cedar tree above them were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had desperately tried to climb it, perhaps to get a better view or escape something on the ground. Their hands were burned and raw, as if they had tried to tend the fire or perhaps even punched it in a final, desperate act. Over the next few days, 3 more bodies were discovered between the cedar tree and the camp. It was Igor Dyatlov, Sinakol Mogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. Their positions suggested they were attempting a desperate crawl back up the slope, back to the relative safety of the tent. They were better dressed than the first 2, but still inadequately for the conditions. They had died of hypothermia, frozen in their final, futile struggle to survive. But this was only the beginning of the horror. For 2 long months, the fate of the final 4 hikers remained a mystery. It wasn't until May, when the snow began to melt, that their bodies were finally found. They were discovered in a ravine, buried under 4 meters of snow, about 75 meters away from the cedar tree. And what the medical examiners found was shocking. Ludmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov had suffered massive, crushing chest fractures, the kind of injuries a forensic expert compared to the force of a high-speed car crash. Nicolae Thibault-Brignoles had a catastrophic skull fracture. Yet, strangely, their bodies showed no external signs of trauma. There were no bruises or soft tissue damage that would normally accompany such devastating injuries. It was as if they had been crushed by an immense, invincible force. And then came the most bizarre and disturbing detail of all. Ludmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lip. Some reports state others were missing their eyes as well. To make things even stranger, traces of low-level radiation were found on the clothing of some of the victims. Where could it have come from in the middle of the remote Ural Mountains? Faced with these inexplicable facts, Soviet investigators were baffled. The case was abruptly closed, and the files were classified. The official cause of death was stated as a compelling natural force. This vague and unsatisfying conclusion only fueled decades of speculation. So, what really happened on that mountain? Let's explore the theories, from the scientific to the supernatural. The most widely accepted official explanation today is a slab avalanche in 2020. Russian investigation concluded that a slab of snow, weakened by fierce winds, and the hikers cutting into the slope to pitch their tent, slid down onto the tent. This would have caused a panic, forcing them to cut their way out and flee. It could potentially explain some of the internal injuries. However, this theory has major holes. The search party found no evidence of an avalanche. The tent was only partially covered, not buried. The hikers' footprints were clear and undisturbed, which wouldn't be the case after a snowslide, and it fails to explain the radiation, the missing tongue, or why they fled so far from their shelter instead of digging it out. This leads us to a darker theory. A secret Soviet weapons test gone wrong. The Ural Mountains were a hub of military and nuclear activity during the Cold War. Some researchers speculate that the hikers accidentally wandered into a test zone for something like a parachute mine or a new type of radiological weapon. This could account for the radiation and the strange orange spheres that other campers and locals reported seeing in the sky on that very night. A concussion blast from such a weapon could cause the severe internal injuries without leaving external marks. It would also explain why the Soviet government was so quick to classify the case and seal the records to cover up a fatal military blunder. Then there are the more unusual, but scientifically plausible, explanations. One is this phenomenon, known as a Carmine vortex street, can occur when wind hits a mountain peak in a specific way, creating a low-frequency sound that is below the range of human hearing. However, infrasound can have profound physiological effects, inducing feelings of intense anxiety, nausea, breathlessness, and pure, irrational panic. Could the specific weather conditions that night have turned the mountain itself into a weapon, creating a sound that drove the hikers mad with fear, causing them to flee their tent in a state of terror? Another theory ties into this idea of irrational behavior. Paradoxical undressing. It's a known medical phenomenon associated with severe hypothermia. As a person nears death from cold, their constricted blood vessels suddenly dilate, creating a sensation of intense, overwhelming heat. This causes them to feel like they are burning alive and irrationally remove their clothes. This could explain why some were found in their underwear, but it's a symptom, not a cause. It doesn't explain what made them run from the tent in the first place, or the horrific internal injuries. Finally, we must consider the local legends. The indigenous Mansi people have long warned of these mountains. They speak of the Menk, a tall, ape-like creature, a Siberian Yeti that fiercely protects its territory. Could the hikers have stumbled upon something the Mansi have always known to avoid? The immense force required to cause the chest and skull fractures could be explained by an attack from a large, powerful creature. While there's no physical proof, the idea of an unknown entity in the wilderness adds another layer of primal fear to the incident. So, we are left with a collection of haunting, unanswered questions. Why were the hikers so terrified they ripped their way out of their only shelter? What caused the massive internal injuries with no external signs of a fight? Where did the radiation come from? What happened to Ludmila Dubinina's tongue? And what were the glowing orange spheres seen in the sky that night? The avalanche theory doesn't fit. The weapons test theory is compelling but unproven. Infrasound and paradoxical undressing explain some behaviors, but not the whole story. The Yeti remains a legend. The truth seems to be a puzzle where none of the pieces quite fit. The case was officially closed, the files sealed, the cause of death attributed to an unknown compelling force. Perhaps that's the most honest answer we'll ever get. The 9 hikers went looking for adventure, but they found something else, something terrifying, something lethal, and something that remains to this day. A chilling secret the Mountain of the Dead refuses to give up. What do you think happened on Dyatlov Pass? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed diving into history's greatest mysteries, make sure to like and subscribe for more.